All right, nice to meet you all. I'm Naomi. So this is my project on terminology for ADHD and how people conceptualize ADHD. So there's been a great deal of discourse in the autism community about which terms are appropriate for autism and whether it's a deficit or a sort of different brain configuration. So I wanted to approach these sort of similar questions, but for ADHD, where I feel they have been substantially less discussed. So I recruited 4 different interest groups of people. So there's people who have ADHD in like the light blue, parents of children with ADHD in purple, professionals in an ADHD-related field. So I'm just going to note that that's very broadly defined. So that's anyone who does work in psychology, whether they work with ADHD or not. And then finally, in gray, just members of the general public. So that's people who don't fit any of the first 3 criteria. As you can imagine, there's a lot of overlap between those first 3 groups because the condition is heritable, and often people who have an interest in working with it professionally, it's because they have it. So this middle section of the poster, I just have a bunch of terms, and I asked people what their opinion of the term was when applied to someone with ADHD. So first, I examined person-first language versus identity-first language. And as you can see, person with ADHD was much more popular. And likewise, I looked at whether ADHD is something you have or something that you are. And similarly, has or have ADHD was the preferred framing. In both cases, I sort of wonder whether there's a grammatical component to that preference. Like with autism, you have like the adjective autistic, the noun autist, or autism. But ADHD, you just, that's all you get. You don't get an adjective. So I wonder to what degree that's a statement about ADHD as an identity versus like just a grammatical preference. Like some people said that ADHD person just sounds wrong to them. Moving on, I looked at whether people felt it was a form of neurodiversity, and that was relatively uncontroversial. And then I also looked at like the fun TikTok version of the term, like neurospicy or neurosparkly. And as you can see, broadly unpopular, but notably, if you look at neurodiverse and neurosparkly, there's sort of like an uptick of parents towards the right side of the graph for both of them. So I sort of wonder if there's a component of parents looking for like a fun framing to make their kid feel better about it, or maybe they're getting that from the school system, like what are your child's strengths? I thought that was interesting. I think the most surprising finding for my poster was when I asked about disability. And people had very negative views of using disability language when applying it to someone with ADHD. And I found this surprising because personally, I don't view the term disabled as a pejorative. And I feel ADHD like definitely is a disability to me, at least. Like it has associated impairments. So I find it useful to look at through that lens, but it was broadly unpopular. I suspect that people didn't like that because they perhaps think it's a mean thing to say about someone. And when you sort of soften it a bit and change it to has a disability, it seems a bit more popular. Finally, I asked people whether it was a medical construct or a social construct. Well, I asked about both independently, so people were allowed to agree or disagree with either. Most people agree that it is a medical construct, which I think is unsurprising. Like it's a diagnosis in the DSM. Interestingly, social construct was much more split. Now, I'm not sure how the average person understands that term, so I neglected to ask why people stated the preference that they did. So it's difficult to interpret why people did or didn't think ADHD is a social construct. I think the argument for would be that we live within a particular paradigm where you're expected to sit down and be still for 8 hours a day while you're at your job or while you're at school. So ADHD might have become a diagnosis in such a society where the people who can't meet that expectation are disabled. But again, I have no idea what people were thinking when they rated it as a social construct or not. Yeah, it was nice meeting you all. Feel free to drop by my poster if you'd like to chat more about it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Please join me in welcoming Ashar to give us a quick overview of his work on robustness analysis of constraint, not confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. So I've been looking at models of obesity and robustness analysis, both conjointly, and I'm asking the question of whether these particular models of obesity I'm looking at are robust in the right way. So there's these two popular models of obesity in obesity research, energy balance and carbohydrate insulin model. They both represent two families of models that have characterized the debate in obesity research for the past 80 years. So energy balance and energy storage models. Energy balance models use the familiar energy balance idea, calories in, calories out. The idea that obesity always results from a influx or a surplus of energy in, and they implicate energy balance as the key variable to track. Carbohydrate insulin model, or the storage models, implicate adipose tissue physiology as the key thing to track. So the idea there is that there is something about adipose tissue that forces us to store more energy in fat cells that then leads to less available fuel for metabolic functions, which then implicates central nervous control of eating behaviors, forces you to eat more, and therefore weight goes up. So the basic energy balance structure is kept in the storage models, but they implicate the dietary component more, right? So if whatever the composition of diet is causally impacts how storage and partition will work in adipose tissue, then the thing we have to track is diet. Dietary interventions become a viable path towards treating obesity. So this is the big debate. In a paper in 2022 by Kevin Hall et al. On the energy balance model, which is now widely considered the best formulation of the energy balance model in recent years, Hall and al. Make the explicit claim that their model, the EBM, is a more robust model of obesity than the CIM. And I'm doing a little bit of that philosophical thing where I'm picking on the word robustness. Scientists can mean a lot of things by robustness, but in any case, I ask what kind of robustness is on offer here. So then I go and investigate the philosophical literature on robustness and construct the various ways the philosophers have answered the question of what robustness means and what kind of inference it licenses. And I construct a whole model for what possible robustness is operative in Hall's body of evidence that they cite in this paper, and what actual inference this is licensed. So I'll quickly run over three of the more interesting varieties of robustness the philosophers have explored, and then I'll finally run over how that maps onto the taxonomy of obesity that I'm considering here. Right. So the first in my view, most important view of robustness out there is this within model framework of robustness. So this is the idea that you're looking at one model or maybe a class of closely related models, and you're varying parameter values or changing auxiliaries or anything in the model, and a robust result keeps popping up. A prototypical example of this is Schelling's checkerboard model of residential segregation, which if anyone's ever heard of, is this idea where Schelling models checkerboard pieces, black and white pieces, and there are utility functions given to each piece. And there are these rules about if a piece shares more neighbors that are alike than fewer, there are rules for moving or not moving. And the result is that if you iterate Schelling's checkerboard long enough, there will always be segregation. And that result is set to be robust because it's sensitive to perturbations of all the parameter values. So you can make the checkerboard larger or smaller, you can have more or fewer pieces, you can fiddle with the utility functions, but the robust result keeps coming up. The problem with that view the philosophers have highlighted is that that gives you some license about what's going on in the model. It tells you which causal variables are producing the result in the model. So in Schelling's case, it's the utility functions, this mild in-group preference thing that's producing the result within the model. But that doesn't give you the license to claim that that model is a sufficient representation of the target system you're trying to model, right? So there's lots of reasons why there's residential segregation that might not be reducible to mild in-group preferences, namely a history of racism in the United States, for example, right? So that's within model robustness. It gives you some tools to assess what assumptions in your model is doing the work, doing the causal explanatory work, but maybe it doesn't give you the inference to generalize that model onto a target system, right? Then there's a cross-model robustness. Cross-model robustness is the idea that you have an ensemble of models that are sufficiently statistically distinct. Now, there's no real recipe to claim why they're sufficiently statistically distinct. Elliot Sober wrote a paper in the 90s that questioned whether that degree of statistical independence can ever really be proved in practice. I don't have a good answer to this, but you just assume that you have a set of models that are distinct. The idea there is that if you have a set of models that are sufficiently distinct and they converge on a robust result while changing parameter values or auxiliaries, then you can be confident that the result that you achieve is a real feature of the world. It's robust across these various different ways of carving up the target system. Thus, we can be confident that the thing that keeps popping up across our models is real. However, that doesn't give you a license to make an inference about what in those models is doing the causal work. Namely, because you're changing parameter values and all the auxiliaries that you're fiddling with all at once, right? So because you're not systematically varying things in your model, you don't have a sense for what gives you the causal licensing, right? Now, finally, there's this newer conception of a robustness analysis offered by Schubach in his 2018 paper called explanatory robustness analysis. And that's the idea that robustness can be used to discriminate between two competing theories. And there are special conditions given for why and how that is achieved. And that involves something like a discriminatory step with each robust detection. So the idea is that if theory A predicts A happens and theory B predicts A does not happen, and you have successive robust detections of A happening, then those detections successively and robustly discriminate between the two theories, right? So I take all of this and apply it to the claims that Hall et al. Make in their 2022 paper and the enormous body of models that they refer to, some comprising the within model kind of robustness that I'm talking about, some comprising the across model kind of robustness I'm talking about. And I think I don't have enough time to give you the details of those models, but please come see me outside. The conclusion that I reach is that there is some strong sense of within and across model robustness in Hall's evidence base. So this fat buffering idea that long-term energy imbalances are stored in fat tissue is robustly true in a within and across model sense. However, that does not give us the license to discriminate between the EBM and CIM. That tells us that that fat buffering result is a robust structural constraint on modeling, is my ultimate thesis, that this kind of robustness analysis gives us constraint, but not confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as Ashar mentioned, please take a chance, if you haven't already, to look through and peruse the posters and ask questions. Up next, we have Abel, Peña.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Abel Peña from School of Life Sciences and the Weidman Lab in the Biodesign Institute at Arizona State University. My poster is Evolutionary Cell Biology, Integration Barriers and Strategies. So you might ask, what is evolutionary cell biology? Sometimes just EvoCell Bio or ECB. Well, in one way at least, the name says it all. It's an emerging interdisciplinary integration between the field of evolutionary biology, which investigates the universal process of life, evolution by natural, including non-adaptive selection, and the field of molecular cell biology, which investigates the universal unit of life, the cell. In stating things this way, the marriage of these fields appears inevitable. In the words of the cytologist Edmund Beecher Wilson, the key to every biological problem must finally be sought in the cell, for every living organism is, or at some time has been, a cell, evolutionarily speaking. In fact, it's a bit of a remarriage, for it was only after the rediscovery of Mendelian genetics in the early 20th century that cell biology embarked on a modern synthesis and seemingly turned its nose up at the relevance of evolution. Researchers have identified several key challenges facing evolutionary cell biology, including bridging the genotype-phenotype gap and developing new model organisms, model here in this sense of ideal. But I want to focus on the elephant in the room, which is this problem or notion of integration. Namely, what is the best path to integration in this case? What does integration in evo cell bio mean or look like? There's several barriers to integrating evolutionary and cell biology. Let's talk about just two of them. First, there are conceptual barriers. What I mean is that there are seemingly similar concepts that do different work in these fields. Take the concept of evolution. From Theodosis Dobzhansky's Genetics and the Origin of Species, 100 years ago, biologists inherited an influential account of evolution in which macro-level evolution is explained, even caused by, micro-level evolution. And with subsequent work in population genetics, the view that micro-level evolution consists in the frequency of gene variant, in the changes in the frequency of gene variants has become widespread. But consider the mitochondrial evolution hypothesis from cell biology. Here, the description of evolution is one in which we consider an initially ectosymbiotic or external relationship between a bacterium and perhaps a kind of single-celled Asgard archaean predecessor. And over many generations and attempted phagocytosis and resistance, the bacterium becomes a successful endo or internal symbiont. And many, many generations after that, the bacterium loses its independence through transfer of genes to the archaean nucleus, eventually becoming the mitochondrion we know and love, the powerhouse of the cell. Fine. But where is the population genetics description in that story? Mitochondrial evolution doesn't seem simply like a change in the frequency of alleles. I should mention that another recently integrated field, evolutionary developmental biology, or EVO-DEVO, has been defined in a reduction to a population genetics concept of evolution and has proceeded quite successfully. Analyses and attempted explications of other biological concepts are plausibly relevant here. I'm talking about the bifurcation of biological function into questions about a component's contribution within a specified system, i.e. causal role function, generally favored in cell biology, and into questions about why a component or trait exists at all, etiological function favored in evolutionary biology. The species debate and our choice of species concept is plausibly relevant for evo cell bio, since evolution at the unicellular level will involve asexually reproducing organisms, and a criterion of sexual reproduction in a species concept won't do. One of the other barriers for evolutionary cell biology worth mentioning is infrastructural. Here, I will only briefly say that the common practice of cloistering in academic institutions where the evolutionary biology and ecology departments are grouped together, while molecular cellular and developmental departments are grouped together, and never the twain shall meet, contributes to numerous barriers. These include a lack of familiarity, both epistemic and interpersonal, between these cloisters, as well as significant discrepancies of funding and ultimately some degree of distrust. And this is a bit of a cheat move, but since I'm nearing the end of my time and I've gathered that I'm in a group with sympathies, I'll just say that I think the resources of a pluralistic approach to disciplinary and conceptual integration are likely to be of immediate use to the newly emerging field, even while the monists take up the the reductionist baton of old. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Rachael Green.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachael Green. I'm a first year's master's student at Colorado State University, and I'm sorry to do it, but I'm bringing in Heidegger to today's conference. So I'm going to be looking specifically at the psychological tensions within his understanding of authenticity that I'm pulling from Being in Time. So my research question that I'm looking at is, to what extent can Heidegger's being towards death be existentially appropriated without psychological destabilization, and how do empirical attitudes towards death shape this possibility? So as I was reading Being in Time, I kept coming up with this core tension between his understanding of being towards death and living authentically, and thinking about how I approach death and how I would want to comfortably approach death also, this kind of psychological tension. And so what I see here is that Heidegger is showing that authenticity requires confronting death as one's ownmost possibility. But psychologically, confronting mortality often produces a lot of distress, instability. It's a very fearful thing for a lot of us. And so there is, as I said, this core tension between Heidegger's existential truth and psychological viability. And ultimately, I come to argue this very long thesis, but essentially, his authentic being towards death is philosophically illuminating, but difficult for humans to sustain. And so you can see here I have a reconstruction of Heidegger's ontological framework. This is going to be especially helpful for people who need kind of that little reminder of Heidegger's work. But what I'm trying to do here is understand this ontological framework in terms of common psychological attitudes towards death. So I look at 4 of them. The first is going to be approach acceptance, where death is often seen as this kind of transition. So people with this often have beliefs in some kind of an afterlife, spiritual continuation, or if it's not religious, they have some kind of legacy that they're leaving behind. And this is shown to have low anxiety rates, but also higher well-being with it. But however, with Heideggerian reading, so this is my attempt to take what he's said and apply it to psychology. So importantly here, as one of the methodological considerations, is that Heidegger doesn't make any sorts of psychological claims within his work. So this is kind of like a translation from his Heideggerian language into common accessible language and then into psychology. So I argue that he would essentially say that this kind of understanding of death obscures finitude. It's not seen as one's own most resolute ending. It's more of this transition where death ends, but I'm back here in my afterlife. And so psychologically, we see that's really good. We see positive well-being, but for the Heideggerian reading, I argue that it reads as inauthentic. The second one is going to be the escape acceptance, where death is framed as this relief from suffering. So essentially, you live a very painful life. Death is a positive thing because it is eliminating that suffering for you. This psychologically is associated with a lot of depression and suicidal ideation. And on the Heidegger reading, it instrumentalizes death, essentially. It's this kind of inauthentic fleeing that isn't genuinely standing in the resoluteness of your own death. The next one is neutral acceptance. So this one and then death anxiety are going to be the 2 really important ones for my argument, where death is seen as this natural, inevitable process. And importantly, it's kind of this understanding where you're driving on the road with your dad as a kid and you see a dead raccoon and you're like, oh no, this is horrible. And then your dad's like, it's just a part of life. It's okay. So it's kind of yeah, this is part of life. It's fine. And so there's that kind of neutral approach to having death, but it also doesn't have that kind of individuation that's really important for Heidegger. And so this comes close to authenticity because there is this recognition that you are going to face death, but it removes some of that individuation that enables a docile being to stand resolutely in their own death. And then death anxiety is essentially just this very persistent awareness of your own death, as well as that kind of existential dread that you experience. So this is psychologically destabilizing, where it comes with a lot of if you're hyper aware of your death and you're just nothing, everything's meaningless and nothing matters and this is horrible. So that's a little bit more psychologically harmful. But on the Heideggerian reading, I argue that this is the closest reading to being truly authentic in the Heideggerian perspective. So you can see in well, it's a little small now, but in that key findings section, that's a nice summary of everything there. And I ultimately argue that authenticity is existentially illuminating, but psychologically unstable. And so we see that we need this kind of a trade-off between authenticity and well-being. And I argue that neutral acceptance is the best compromise. It's not fully authentic. I don't think Heidegger would be especially happy with that. But I think that the purpose of philosophy is to be able to apply it to our everyday lives. We need to have that to some extent, which I know is arguable. And I think that this is a question that remains here. Should existential truth be constrained by psychological livability? I think in many ways it should be, if we want to be able to actually live productive lives. So Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Up next, we have Kinzie, who's going to talk to us again about dissociative identity disorder. So join me in welcoming her.
Okay, thanks everyone for the awesome warm-up in the lobby. That was really good for helping me consolidate my thoughts together, because I think this is a really ambitious project that I took on last year. And essentially what we did, my advisor and I, well, you know, he was overseeing this project, but he let me kind of run wild with it. So I wanted to look at some case studies looking at dissociative identity disorder and how it challenged identity theory of mind. And I came into this thinking that identity theory of mind is a philosophical framework that is oftentimes taken for granted in psychiatry. And what UT Place decided when he was proposing what identity theory of mind, which I abbreviate as ITOM, is that, you know, to kind of absolve the mind-body problem, we're gonna, you know, really stand firm on physicalism. And in doing so, he determines that there's this one-to-one perfect correspondence between mental states and brain states. And so he's this material monist, and that all of these mental processes can be explained through like different physical changes in the brain. And the reason that I found ITOM to kind of be this like intuited belief system in psychiatry is because it tries to uphold that there's this unified sense of self, which include agency and decision making, continued autobiographical memory, accessible to one individual, and that there's also an integrated awareness across experiences, space, and time. And so at the end of the day, this project kind of tries to answer if we can adjudicate this triad of a unified self, DID as a real clinical condition, and ITOM as a fundamental framework, and can we have all three of these existing at once? And so in looking at case studies, it was in purpose of DID being a very rare condition to come across, and so there's not these like wide-scale studies of 30,000 people with DID. So looking at case studies is a very powerful tool, especially because when you interact with people who have DID, like they also are very scared of the situation that they're in, and so, you know, doing it in a very conscientious, ethical way and interacting with them is also very vital. So I break this down into a temporal discussion and also a spatial discussion. So in the temporal avenue, I look at a 2009 case study of a 23-year-old woman who had two distinct self states that were drastically different from one another. One of them speaking English, the other one speaking her native tongue. They had different polarizing characteristics of being the English speaker was very very scholarly, very what is the word? Like very kept to herself a lot. You know, she just was like going throughout the world in a very like stoic kind of way. Didn't really speak out against much, but her altered did not speak English, was identifying as a much younger, like age-wise identified as a 13-year-old boy, was very hyperactive, very sexually deviant, which was very counterintuitive to like the host self. And so I leaned really strongly on Piaget's personality evolution in the self and how that difference in personality outward to people didn't really fit into how Genet was articulating personality evolution. And so what this told us was that the sum of these mental states didn't really equate to the sum of all these brain states of how can you have somebody who is both incredibly like deviant in one moment and then this next moment just completely antithetical to what they were just explaining. And so the summation of the parts didn't necessarily synergize in the way that I think ITOM argues for. And then secondly, I take on an approach on the spatial level of how this could work. And this is in a very neuroscience-y way, so if you find me and have something that will change my opinion, I'm very, very open to that. So I look at the coordination between brain states. I think it makes a lot of sense in neuroscience to say that, you know, there's one part of my brain that operates on my executive functioning, and another one is where my memory is stored, instead of saying that, like, agent A is in the left side of my brain and agent B is in the lower right side of my brain. So we adopt that. But we see that that's not actually a sufficient condition, or it's a necessary but insufficient condition for personhood. And we look at the case of BT, who, this was a 2015 study of a person with DID who had 10 documented alters, and this individual had been in a car accident that over the course of 13 months had progressively declined their visual cortex. But in the triggering of different self states, the visual cortex was able to completely restore itself, which was really fascinating because they were doing all these neurological studies of how could that happen, and they were seeing that after an accident, if you were going to have any sort of plasticity, it would have happened immediately instead of over, 13 months or however long that it was after the incident that the vision would have restored itself. And so essentially this also informs us that the detection of neural architecture changes in technology needs to be further developed to kind of support our ideas about physicalism in neuroscience, instead of kind of giving it the benefit of, oh, this is just a technology, this is just explained in technology that we don't have yet. I think that this is something that as we evolve in our technological processes could be very fruitful, but I don't want to be precocious and say that, we're going to default it to be explained for sure in the end. And then the second part of this spatial context is an integration, where we look at appearingly normal parts and emotional parts, which are reactions in which we navigate different traumatic experiences that happen to us. And emotional parts are kind of the emotional reactions that we have. I get really anxious when I am reminded of something that had happened to me. And they suspect that this occurs in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is where I was talking about in the lobby. But you see that in people who have DID, the neuronal activity in this region is disconcerted, and that the way that these EPs are engaging aren't necessarily in the way that we see with people who don't have DID, which further affirms our point that there's this failure to accommodate to this sum of all mental states is the sum of all brain states, because again, how can you have these different memories that are so profoundly real to each state, and the totality of it doesn't necessarily equate all together. So we conclude that at best, you can't have all three of an integrated self, DID, as a clinically valid experience, and ITOM as a fundamental theory in psychiatry, but you can have two of them. And so what we see is that if you subscribe that ITOM is a fundamental theory in psychiatry, and you also have a sense of a unified self, that DID isn't necessarily, this person who would assume this would say that DID is not actually a clinically problematic condition. It's just a more extreme change in personality. It's just a more exacerbated example of, I'm hangry and then I eat and then I'm totally fine after. And then if you subscribe that ITOM and dissociative identity disorder are, both very real, then we kind of abandon any sort of social order in the way that we're reacting. We kind of abandon I can act crazy all the time. People can also, act, inconsistent throughout their lives, and there's no issue with the way that we all interact with one another. There's no real strong regard for how our relationships change. And that lastly, if you subscribe that a unified self and DID are both real, then we see that again, this summation of mental states cannot equate to the summation of brain states, and that a simultaneous existence and absence of certain memories, awareness, and executive functioning doesn't necessarily manifest in a productive way. And so ultimately, I'd like to see this future, I think over time, hopefully the technology that we develop can kind of help lean in what direction we may subscribe to in the way that DID presents itself, but we come in with the strong point that to really accept this as a project, you have to accept that DID is a very clinically real concern that we have in psychiatry, because there are definitely philosophers who would deny that DID is not a clinical problem, but when you have when you're in the clinic and seeing individuals who have this, they are, exhibiting different senses of self, and the way that they use language to describe their body is definitely inhibitory on their quality of life and their way that they function throughout the world. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, last but not least, we have Alyssa, who's going to give us a overview on the Spectator Society.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alyssa D'Ambrosio. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary. My research today explores what I call the Spectatorship Society. This is a society that is curated and shaped by digital media in which we increasingly observe, curate, and perform experiences rather than actively participate in our own lives. Social media platforms that I'm looking at are Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, X, anything that has the ability to procure scrollable content for individuals. However, my argument in this case is that these platforms are more than just tools for entertainment. Instead, they're environments that shape habits of attention, action, self-understanding, and actually moral psychology. What the actual issue is here is not that we spend too much time online, but the deeper concern that I have in my research is that these digital environments gradually reorganize how we experience agency. Our ability to act deliberately, make meaningful choices, and feel present with our own lives is actually diminished because we lose this quality time of interacting with one another. Many of us know this similar feeling of, picking up your phone for a specific task and going, oh, I have to call my mom or I have to do something. And then you end up going to other apps. You go through other applications. You even find yourself scrolling minutes later or even hours later of no clear memory of why you actually started, right? We might not even enjoy what we're doing, but we continue to do it anyway. This condition that I've decided to coin now as drift scrolling is different than doom scrolling. So doom scrolling essentially looks at negative content online, falling kind of into this hole of this online world of, upsetting information that you can't pull away from, okay? However, drift scrolling refers to this broader state of passive, frictionless, endless media, right? It happens to when we're continuously consuming digital media despite no longer wanting to do so, but no end in sight. A phenomenal example of this idea is looking at kinesis and angira from Aristotle, right? When we're looking at this idea of rest, of active rest and actively doing stuff and then, pursuing wisdom as us philosophers do. Instead, what we end up doing is we can look at it like a way of taking out the garbage, right? There's an end in sight. You have your garbage, you go to the end of the driveway, you deposit the trash. With this form of drift scrolling, there is no end in sight. You pick up the garbage and you just walk down this driveway that doesn't exist. There's no end. And then you just drop it eventually, and then you pick it up later. What I argue occurs from this is a new concept of acratic action that I term digital akrasia. Obviously, akrasia is when we act against our own better judgment. We, instead of going to bed or brushing our teeth, we stay up and we doom scroll or we drift scroll, right? Doing this continuously on these digital platforms intensifies this condition because they are designed to reward impulse rather than reflection. So we have these endless feeds, notification, metric-driven environments, and these metrics end up becoming measurable forms of validation, encouraging us to seek out visibilities rather than fulfillment. So on here, I have our graph of average time spent with friends. This is taken from Jonathan Haidt's work, the Spectatorship Society. This is taken from Jonathan Haidt's work, and essentially it looks at this boom of social media that we have, which is our gray line. And we can see this steep drop-off of the daily average that we have with our friends because of this boom of social media and scrollable content, right? The result here that I'm looking at is not distraction, but it's a transformation about how value is experienced. So experiences begin to feel more incomplete unless documented, posted, or recognized by others. A walk, a conversation, a meal with your friend isn't actually purposeful unless it's shared online. In this sense, digital cultures encourage what I call technological spectating. So technological spectating is taken from Gabriel Marcel with Spectatorship and Participation, and I'll get to that shortly. Essentially what happens is that we are no longer fully inhabiting our experiences. Instead, we need to observe them through our documentation process and our performance. We become spectators not in our lives, but also the lives of others. And to understand why this matters, we can look at Marcel. So when we talk about participating and spectating in our lives, Marcel essentially argues that participation means being genuinely present, engaging in experiences, connecting to ourselves, to others, and to the world around us. It's not simply just an activity, it's a way of inhabiting life with openness and meaningful experiences. So spectatorship, by contrast, right, creates this distance. You know, I'm gonna watch the hockey game instead of playing with my friends. I'm not going to go out with my friends. I'm just gonna watch everything online. And unlike the television or the radio, the smartphone follows you everywhere. It's constantly on you. It's in your pocket. Heck, I can see 10 of them right now as I'm looking out at all of you, okay? This collapses the boundaries between rest and work, right? Presence and distraction. There's no after school, I'm gonna go sit in front of the TV. The TV's with you on your ride home. It doesn't go away. So this shift matters because it changes the conditions under which agency develops, I argue. Essentially, when distraction is constantly available, drift scrolling is constantly available, it becomes more and more difficult for ourselves to pull away. And to further explain this, I look at William James's moral psychology and his concept of the loop line. The loop line does not explicitly address Socratic action, but it was made for it. So the loop line is this reflective pause that allows us to interrupt our doom scrolling, our walking endlessly with the garbage and not doing anything with it, right? You ask yourself, do I want to keep doing this? How do I feel after I keep doing this? Why don't I want to stop, right? And it's not an addictive state, it's an Socratic state. For example, you might remember how it felt to, you know, wake up one morning feeling absolutely exhausted because you spent all night staying up watching movies or something like that. When you have that realization, the digital media short-circuits this pause, right? The speed, the design, algorithmic feeds get in the way, and this reflection is constantly presenting the next stimulus. In this environment, impulse is obviously becoming automatic. So what I want to emphasize as well through the spectatorship society is that I don't want to look at a pre-digital past. That's not my goal. Instead, I want to look at how we can create conditions in which people can experience the difference between passive, frictionless consumption and meaningful engagement. When we do this, I want to look at how we develop our habits, how we support agency rather than erode it. How can we live with one and the other? Perhaps even more importantly, why do we fall into this state in the first place, right? How do we feel disconnected and dissatisfied all the time? I think this is especially important for a younger generation growing up, you know, that have always had access to phones, especially at a young age, digital media, content, online personalities, and I think it's really important for understanding those who are still developing. If these digital environments are continuously rewarding distraction and validation and performance, it might weaken these reflective capacities that this younger generation is growing up with. This obviously connects to the broader arguments of moral psychology and decision-making theory, as well as Socratic action and addiction and problems such as that. So rather than viewing it as a dependency, an individual choice, I want to ask what kinds of environments can change these patterns of behavior? How can we go into this and pull ourselves out of this spectatorship society where we're not hanging around just on our phones with all of our friends? Ultimately, it's not just a question about technology. It's not just a question about, you know, scrolling on TikTok or making fun videos with your friends. It's a question about what lives we want to live and how digital culture trains us to watch rather than participate, to sit back, right? To become participants in our own experiences rather than spectators of them. If you have more questions and you want to talk to me further, you can see us outside by my poster. Thank you.